The next 5 years of Xi Jinping's reign look like for China, for India, for Taiwan, and for the rest of the world? That's my top focus on the Newstrack tonight.
An unstoppable rise, but not without protests. Anti-Xi anger spreads. But is there a real threat to him? Is Xi unchallengeable? India Today's Global Roundtable. The big focus on Newstrack.
With China's President Xi Jinping strengthening his iron fist on China, anger against his leadership is growing. After the Bridgeman protest in Beijing, similar protest signs started appearing in different parts of the world. Anti-Xi messages were seen on university campuses in the United States, the UK, Europe, and Australia.
An unstoppable rise in the shifting world orders of the 21st century. His iron grip on China, a dominating headline. Xi Jinping, who has just granted himself an unprecedented third term as China's president, setting in stone his total control far into the future. Seen as the leader responsible for the biggest geopolitical rumbles of our time. From the Taiwan crisis to the world's biggest military standoff with India and Ladakh, and playing a role in supporting Russia in the Ukraine conflict. In the days gone by, President Xi has galvanized his throne and secured his strength. But it hasn't been without protest. The famous, mysterious bridge man of Beijing who stuck it to the powers that be, sending out a message that most saw as suicidal. Reminding the world about the defiance at Tiananmen and triggering protests against Xi Jinping around the world, including most notably in Manchester in the United Kingdom. Xi Jinping's China has clamped down brutally on even the message of protest, censoring social media and ridding the airwaves of any semblance of rebellious thought. For China's third-term president, this is hardly a new culture of control. And with his position consecrated into the history books, for the foreseeable future, Xi Jinping is the protagonist of China's new era of aggression, imposition, and expansion. Bureau Report, India Today.
China's President Xi Jinping strengthening his hold over power in China. He's now not just the most powerful man in the world at this moment, but arguably one of the most powerful people in history. What could the next 5 years of Xi Jinping's reign look like for India, for China, for Taiwan, and for the rest of the world? For this China Roundtable, I'm joined on this broadcast by one of the foremost experts and everything to do with what's going on inside the dragon's mind. Kishore Mehbubani joins us, distinguished fellow at the Asia Research Institute. He's the author of Has China Won, has tracked China's growth over the last several decades, well-known diplomat joining us from New York. With us, Ershika Pankaj, Head of Research and Operations Director at the Organization for Research on China and Asia. Welcome, ma'am. Samuel Bresnik joins us, Senior Research Analyst, Carnegie China from Washington, D.C. We've got Shikha Agarwal joining us, Visiting Fellow at the National Cheng Chi University in Taipei, an expert on Taiwan. So let me start by asking Kishore Mehbubani for his broad sense of how you think the next 5 years of Xi Jinping's reign are likely to be. And I'll start first with the question that's uppermost in the minds of people in India. How will his posturing militarily, diplomatically, economically towards India change over the next 5 years?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to your program. You're right. Xi Jinping has emerged as probably the most powerful person in the world today. He has complete command and control of the world's second largest economy in a way that Joe Biden cannot have over his own economy. And at the same time, it's very important that if you step into Xi Jinping's mind, his main priority is number one, internal stability, and number two, dealing with the challenge from the United States. So I don't think, to be very frank with you, that when he wakes up in the morning, India appears in his mind very early. In terms of the challenges and priorities that he has to deal with, I think he knows that China is going to have, in a sense, a life and death struggle against the United States, at least over the next decade or two. So he's very focused on making sure that China is not in any way derailed by this American campaign against China. And what the United States is doing is perfectly logical. The United States is trying to ensure that it remains the number one power in the world. It knows it has about 10 years to keep its status as the number one power in the world. So it's launching this trade war, this technology war, to preserve its number one status. And so Xi Jinping has to deal with that every day. And he knows that that's the real challenge that will define him in Chinese history. Can he succeed in this struggle?
So what's your sense, given the fact that the kind of economic measures that the Biden administration is taking against Chinese tech companies, against Americans who work in China, against Chinese Americans, to make it difficult for China to acquire these kind of high technologies, a lot of which they've simply stolen from the West. Now that they won't have as easy access as they did in the past, how much of a setback could it be for China's technological growth?
If you look at a recent Wall Street Journal report, and the Wall Street Journal, as you know, is not pro-China in any way. The Wall Street Journal report says that Chinese scientists now produce more tier one, peer-reviewed academic papers on science and technology than either American scientists or European scientists. So the Chinese have clearly been capable of developing their own science and technology. Now, let me emphasize that the recent moves taken by the US against China, especially in the area of semiconductors, are going to hurt China, are going to be very painful for China. No question whatsoever. But at the same time, the fundamental question which I keep asking my American friends is, what is your long-term strategy? That's a thesis of my book, Has China Won?, where I quote a one-on-one lunch I had with Henry Kissinger. And he told me that the fundamental problem the US has in dealing with China is that US doesn't have a long-term strategy for dealing with China. What would constitute a win for the US? Because can the US derail China from its economic growth? It cannot. Can the US overthrow the Chinese Communist Party? It cannot. And, can the US isolate China? It cannot. So what exactly is the US trying to achieve? So I actually recommend a wiser course of action for the US of using multilateral rules and institutions to try and constrain China. And that would be the better strategy for the United States. And frankly, the rest of the world would prefer to have a multilateral solution to this huge struggle that will affect all of us.
Samuel Bresnik, even as American politics gets more and more fractured, this CCP meeting showing whatever divisions there are buried so far deep that on the outside, all you see is Xi Jinping reaffirming his position over leadership of the Communist Party, over the army, over the Chinese administrative structure. How do you think the Biden administration in DC is likely to react to Xi emerging as strong as he does, given the questions that Kishore Mehbubani raises about America thinking of China as a competitor, but now not fully certain of how to deal with its growing power?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks for the question. To begin, I think for America and the world, what we're going to see from China going forward is a continuation of Beijing's more confident and aggressive foreign policy under Xi. Before Xi's came to power, China preferred a hide and bide approach to keep a low profile in foreign policy while it built up its strength. Xi has inaugurated a much more muscular foreign policy, crushing protests in Hong Kong, skirmishing with India and the Himalayas, and rolling out the BRI and economic statecraft. So I think the Biden administration really sees Xi as going to be continuing his more muscular foreign policy approach. And in answer to Mr. Mahbubani's suggestion that America doesn't have a long-term strategy to deal with China, I think he's largely correct. Although I think this new raft of export controls that the Biden administration rolled out last week actually constitutes a new goal and strategy for the administration, which is to constrain China's technological development. Before that, I totally agree. The United States can't kneecap China economically, can't derail its political system. But what it can do and what it is trying to do now is to make sure the semiconductors that power China's development of AI, of quantum computers, of targeted missiles and other weapon systems are degraded. This is a shift from trying to run faster than China in technology to really trying to limit China's technological development, which is, I think, the biggest takeaway from the United States strategy so far during the Biden administration.
Shikha Agarwal, you studied the internal politics of China. Is there anything that you picked up from that big Communist Party meeting which was different from what you were expecting or observing from the outside? Or is it really just proof of how well entrenched, now deeply entrenched, Xi Jinping is on all the power structures of China?
Rahul, yes. I mean, obviously, the most obvious outcome for all of us was Xi Jinping entrenching himself even further within the system. But having said that, yes, to me, one of the one of the things that I was intrigued by was the absence of Jiang Zemin and Chu Rongqi from the meeting, from the Congress, that is. So that was something that I would like to, further going on, I would like to look at as to why these two men were not present in at the conference. More importantly, going further, I think, yes, if I can just go a little bit into China's internal political dynamics, yes, I mean, Xi Jinping is going to entrench himself at all levels of power. That is a given. But that is the overt part of the Chinese domestic politics. But if we, really minutely observe this politics, we'll see another trend emerging slowly. It's an underway trend that we really need to focus upon. And that is the rise of the proteges of Xi Jinping's proteges. And this is something that we really need to study going further, because it is not just going to have ramifications for China's internal politics, but also the foreign policy as well. And how this happens is that, Xi Jinping, who controls everything at Zhongnanhai. So yes, he has everybody in Politburo are his men. Everybody in the Politburo is sending committee are his people. But, sitting at Zhongnanhai, he cannot possibly be controlling each and every appointment that is being made at the provincial levels or, even at the central administrative levels. So if we just start looking, then we see that, a lot of these people, emerging people in Chinese domestic politics are actually not directly related with Xi Jinping, but rather they are related or are the acolytes of his proteges. Now, you can always say that, the loyal people who are loyal to him and, they are going to be only foster people who are loyal to him only. But at the same time, we understand that this kind of an equation or doesn't really work in politics, that, loyalty is going to be loyalty and loyalty. This kind of a series does not really happen in politics. Politics is equally about opportunism and ambitions. And Xi Jinping actually is an emblem of this kind of politics because all said and done, he was actually a protege of Jiang Zemin. But look how he has turned the tables on Jiang Zemin. So, this is one of the trends underway, which we clearly need to watch out for.
Mahbubani, how long does this man stay on as president? He's not being challenged, at least not from what we can observe. Is there any sense you have from your deep understanding of China about how long Xi Jinping can stay on as president, and what could potentially happen between now and the next 5 years, which ensures that at the end of the next 5 years, potentially even before, Xi has to step down?
Xi Jinping. Is he someone who's in power for his own personal glory and therefore wants to stay on in the office as long as possible? Or is he someone who feels a historical mission to remove all traces of the century of humiliation that China suffered from 1842 to 1949, as you know? So if that letter is his mission, then I think it's very important for him to understand that he's got to also ensure an orderly succession process and make sure that whatever he does doesn't get destroyed from the time that when he steps down. So my sense is that he's not going to stay in office forever. He has accumulated a lot of power, but he's using it, in his view, to make China much stronger again. He's made mistakes, okay? Let's be very clear. He's not a superhuman being. I think, for example, the COVID-19 policy, zero COVID, I think, really has got to change because it is holding back China significantly. But it's quite natural for a leader to make mistakes. But on balance, if you look at where China is 10 years after he took office, there's no question that China today is a much, much stronger power than it was 10 years ago. And I think 10 years from now, his goal is to ensure that China is much stronger. And when that happens, I think then he'll think of stepping down.
Ashika, Pankaj, how does everything that you've heard from this big Communist Party meeting suggest what this means from India's perspective in the context of China's military modernization? He's spoken, we're seeing greater nationalistic fervor in that Congress in Beijing. We're seeing a push, whether it's on the question of Taiwan, whether it's the PLA delegate who was part of the Galwan clash. We're seeing a lot of nationalistic muscle flexing here. What does it mean for India in your view?
Right. Thank you so much for the question, Rahul. So on this front, I'd like to draw attention to look at the military quotient of topics covered in the report that Xi Jinping presented here on the 16th. She has referenced the need to build, quote unquote, a strong strategic deterrent force system. This term has been largely absent from previous speeches that she has made, and it sort of invokes China's ongoing nuclear expansion and diversification goals. More content on advanced tech and tech concepts, focus on intelligization, speeding up the development of unmanned intelligence systems. This is again straight from his report. These hold direct implications for India, especially along the LAC. The 20th, Congress report that he presented also references the 14th five-year plan for army building, which, goes on from 21 to 25. The updated list of reforms include military academies, military logistics, resource management, more detailed discussion on military training, confrontation and S&T. These things, especially in line with what we saw at the speech, was a focus on continuity and the centennial goals. So while we are focusing on the 2041 centennial, it is also important to keep in mind that the 2027 centennial, which will mark 100 years of the People's Liberation Army, is right around the corner and is the driving force right now behind Xi's military reforms to build a world-class military. So, taking these factors in mind from his speech, as well as taking note of the changes in the Politburo that are expected to come, there are many CMC positions that will be opening up. It is pretty telling of how the people she will choose to appoint in and around him right now will shape the long-term goal he has vis-a-vis the Central Military Commission.
He hasn't, Kishore Mehbubani, spoken about a military attack against Taiwan, referring instead to peaceful reunification. Is that just posturing? How do you see the next 5 years evolve from the China's stated goal of trying to reunify Taiwan with the mainland? Will they make a move?
So as far as the reunification with Taiwan is concerned, yes, definitely there is very clear posturing that is taking place. But you have to understand, Taiwan is something that she cannot falter on. It is going to be something wherein either he has to go all in and win, or, play the long game and bide more time. Similar posturing we can also expect in and along the LAC. And, keeping in mind the Tibet question, that is something I have been noticing has been very missing from the discourse that, has been looking at what Xi's next 5 years are going to look like. For India, I feel especially it's important to take a look at the long-term, strategy and planning India has in mind vis-a-vis, the question of the Dalai Lama's succession process, especially keeping Arunachal Pradesh in mind. So, while focus on Taiwan, while focus on Hong Kong, these are important factors. For India, especially for Delhi, taking a look at, closer to the border and especially to Arunachal Pradesh with Tibet in mind also emerges as a, equally important facet that we should.
Kishore Mehbubani, how do you see Xi move on the question of Taiwan? We saw some military posturing recently after Nancy Pelosi's visit. Is that the extent to which Xi will go, or do you think he could go further and try and reunify Taiwan with the mainland by the use of force?
Well, as you know, China and Xi Jinping are both very concerned that there has been a steady erosion of the one China policy of the United States on Taiwan. And the thing about the Biden administration, which is causing a lot of confusion, is that in every speech given by a Biden administration official, they always mention the United States is committed to a one China policy. And if they are committed to a one China policy, then there's no danger of a war on Taiwan. But when you have actions like Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan, that's hugely provocative. And I want to mention, just so that you have some historical context, in the early 2000s, there was an even more vociferous pro-independence president called Chen Shui-bian. And when he tried to hold a referendum to see whether the people of Taiwan wanted independence, it was George W. Bush who came down very hard on Chen Shui-bian and said, you don't do that. That's a very dangerous, provocative move. And so the Chinese said, oh, the United States believes in a one China policy. Now there's confusion in Beijing about where the Biden administration stands on the one China policy. They see a process of salami slicing on Taiwan, which they're very concerned about. And so the natural reaction to that is to build up their military capabilities. But if Taiwan doesn't declare independence, China will not declare war, because Chinese believe time is on their side. If time is on my side, Taiwan will fall like a ripe fruit in my lap when I become the number one power in the world. So they can afford to be patient on
Samuel
Taiwan.
Bresnik, what's the view in DC on the question of Taiwan? Does most of the Hill think that China will play the waiting game, build their economic, military, diplomatic muscle in a way where you don't really need to fight, because America by then would have understood that China has become stronger and can take Taiwan by force if required?
The mood in DC since the invasion of Ukraine has really changed on Taiwan. We see this mostly through Biden's many speeches. I think there are 4 where he's undermined to a certain degree the idea of strategic ambiguity, which is to say the United States has a policy where it will not say whether or not it will intervene should China invade Taiwan. I think more important was his most recent speech, where when asked whether the United States supports Taiwanese independence, he said that's up for Taiwan to decide. This is something that previous presidents have said they do not support Taiwanese independence. So there is, in a sense, a way in which the United States government is hollowing out its principles. But in DC, they also believe that China is hollowing out its commitments to the one China policy or principle, rather. And I think that there's an action-reaction cycle that's very dangerous, where many Americans now believe in the strategic community that China is seeking to move up the timeline for invading Taiwan. And Secretary Blinken just announced that yesterday, I believe, that there appears to be some sort of intelligence that the timeline is moving up.
Let me put that question to Victor Gao, spokesperson of the Chinese Communist Party, leading academic, joining us from Beijing. The sense in DC, based on intelligence inputs, that China could be pushing up the timeline for a military attack against Taiwan for a forceful reunification. Xi didn't announce this in his speeches. He naturally wouldn't if such a thing is being planned, but you're in Beijing. You understand the inner workings of the CCP. What do you make of this American intelligence, Mr. Gao?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. China is right now in the middle of this 20th Party Congress. President Xi Jinping made a very important speech at the very beginning of this Party Congress in which he talked about the Taiwan situation. And I hope you will listen very carefully. First of all, President Xi Jinping announced that Taiwan issue is completely China's internal affair. It will be decided by the whole Chinese nation, including the 23 million people in Taiwan, but also more than 1.4 billion people in China's mainland. The Taiwan population at 23 million accounts for only 1.6% of the total population in China. Secondly, China will never announce giving up the use of force in achieving national reunification, even though China's preference is to promote peaceful reunification. Allow me to emphasize that there was a former leader of Taiwan, Mr. Ma Ying-jeou, who said for the record that actually since the beginning of the 1960s, China's mainland already has possessed sufficient military wherewithals to take Taiwan by force if it is necessary. However, you need to think why China has waited almost 60 years and has never tried to use force to achieve national reunification, because people on both sides of the Taiwan Straits are all Chinese people, and because it is universally acknowledged and recognized by the whole mankind that there is only one China, and Taiwan is part of China. This remains the official U.S. position. Allow me to emphasize. President Biden has never changed this one China policy. It is the official position of the United States of America. The American panelists just now mentioned that President Biden on 4 occasions said about sending U.S. troops to defend Taiwan. However, he should also emphasize that the President of the United States is not the totality of the presidency. There is the presidency. On each occasion, President Biden was corrected by the presidency, by the White House, by the military, by the Pentagon, fortunately, because otherwise he will lead the world to Armageddon. War is not and should not be an option between China and the United States, and any war between China and the United States will spin out of control into Armageddon. If the President of the United States wants to lead mankind into Armageddon, he will be kicked out of White House. That's simple. So I hope all of us will promote peace rather than agitate for war. And no political force or military force in the world will take Taiwan away from China. This is the megatrend. Come on, let's live with the megatrend rather than fight against the megatrend.
One of the other megatrends that has just started is this trend of the United States and the West clamping down on the kind of high technology collaboration that made a lot of China's rise possible over the last few decades, a lot of semiconductors, a lot of advanced AI, ML kind of technologies, China will no longer have access to. Now that seems to be one of the big moves that the Biden administration is making. How badly do you think that would hit China's growth in the future, Mr. Gao?
You are raising a very important point. However, for the record, allow me to emphasize several points. One is that China is not only one of the biggest manufacturers of semiconductor chips of all kinds, China is also the biggest importer of semiconductor chips of all kinds, including from China's Taiwan province, from Republic of Korea, from Japan, and from the United States. If the United States government position is to forbid any other countries or regions to sell their semiconductor products to China, do you know what will be the first result or first consequence? They will lead to the decline of the semiconductor businesses in these countries. If you look at the share price performance of many US semiconductor companies, they are in decline rapidly. Secondly, by such manhandling by the United States of China, it forces China to be completely self-reliant in semiconductor businesses. Allow me to put it for the record. In less than 10 years, China will not need to buy any single chip from abroad. China will be increasingly self-reliant and independent. And further, China has now come up with its own very unique and proprietary ways of making semiconductor chips.
But most of them, with respect, Mr. Gao, are previous generation chips. If you compare with Taiwan, where a lot of the new innovations in chip design are happening, maybe because of the way the society is engineered, maybe because of the fact that they've been aping a lot of Western technologies in the past, China isn't really so far at the cutting edge of chip design.
You're right. In some sectors, China is in the leading league. Some sectors, China is not in the leading league. However, because of the pressure from the United States, China is now putting in huge amounts of investments and mobilizing its national resources. That's the reason why I said for your audience in India and for the global audience that China will achieve complete self-reliance in semiconductor chips. And this is exactly the point. Bill Gates emphasized that by manhandling China as far as semiconductor chips is concerned, the United States government is causing the demise of the US semiconductor industry. So if you really want to put politics ahead of trade and globalization, you fall into your own trap. And the United States will no longer be the champion of innovation and international cooperation. It will be the major force blocking international trade and international cooperation and globalization. This will be the worst mistake that the United States government will ever make in its history.
Okay, how do you see China's relationship with India change over the next 5 years? You've got the PLA amassed along the line of actual control, Victor Gao. We saw officers who were part of the Galwan clash, who were part of the delegates at this Chinese Communist Party meeting. Do you see the aggressive military maneuvers that we've seen from the PLA continue? Or now that Xi is firmly entrenched, do you see the PLA dial down on some of this aggression?
First of all, me, Victor Gao, is a great friend of the Indian people. I always propose for peace and good neighborliness between China and India. Secondly, there is indeed a territorial dispute between China in the eastern section, middle section, and the western section. However, allow me to emphasize that the territorial disputes between China and India were not created by India and were not created by China. Do you know who created the territorial dispute between China and India? They were created by the British colonial rulers of India. And also allow me to emphasize, if the British imperialists could not achieve their goal of penetrating into China's Tibet, then nobody will be able to take territories of Tibet away from China. Therefore, I truly believe China and India, the two largest populations in the world, I've coined a term called the superpopulations, referring to both China and India or any other country with a population of above 1 billion. And we have extraordinary responsibilities not only for the Chinese people and the Indian people, but also for mankind as a whole. We need to get along with each other. We need to use all our wisdom to solve whatever territorial disputes between us. And these territorial disputes were the bad legacies left by the British colonists of India. Why should China and India be held hostage by the bad things done by the British colonists? We will be able to muster our courage, wisdom, and vision to transcend this bad legacy left by the British colonists in India. And I truly believe the world will be greater if the Chinese nation and the Indian nation can treat each other as partners rather than as
if
rivals.
China continues to build new military installations all along the line of actual control, there's a fat chance that that's going to happen, but that is fine. At least it's important to hear what's going on in the mind of the Communist Party. But I want to put this question to Kishore Mehbubani before I wrap up about China and India having at this time arguably amongst the strongest leaders they've had in many decades. Xi Jinping very clearly has a plan for restoring China to its previous glory in the Committee of Nations, and Prime Minister Modi in the way that he can, working hard on strengthening India. What's your sense of the similarities, dissimilarities between the visions that both these leaders, who happen to be in power in these two important countries at the same time, have?
Well, I think there's a tremendous historic opportunity today for India and China to find a long-term solution for getting along with each other. And this can only be done when you have simultaneously strong leaders on both sides. And there's no doubt that Xi Jinping is one of the strongest leaders that China has had. And Prime Minister Modi is one of the strongest leaders that India has had. But to achieve that kind of agreement, I am an Indian, as you know, ethnically. And the one mistake that Indians make is that when it comes to geopolitics, they like to moralize a lot. And frankly, once you begin to moralize in geopolitics, you end up shooting yourself in the foot because you're not cold, calculating, and cunning, which you should be in your geopolitical calculations. And India has a tremendous opportunity today to emerge as the strongest independent power in the world. And I can tell you, the whole world wants to see India as the new strongest independent power in the world that is not tied either to China or not tied to the United States. But to achieve that position of being a strong independent power, you got to have good ties with all the other powers, with the United States, with China, with Russia, with Japan, with everybody else. But if you have a difficult relationship which you cannot resolve with China, then you end up shooting yourself in the foot because it constrains you in terms of what you can do. And what is also shocking here, and I've written about this, is that everybody knows, any serious person knows, that in the ultimate border solution within India and China, there'll be no major changes of territory. India is going to keep Arunachal Pradesh. China is going to keep Aksai Chin. That's very clear. And indeed, two Chinese leaders, Zhou and Lai, had proposed, let's accept the line of control. Deng Xiaoping had proposed, let's accept the line of control. So the solution is there, but it requires some wisdom and courage on the part of both leaders, and this is the moment to do it. And if India does it, if India settles this issue with China, and India has a free hand then to emerge as the independent power in the world, the whole world will cheer and say, this is what the world needs from India today.
Well, we have a situation where the People's Liberation Army continues its military posturing against India, amassed across the line of actual control, building new airports, new military installations. That's hardly the language of somebody who wants to talk about peace and equal progress. But anyway, it's been interesting to listen to a spokesperson from the Chinese Communist Party, to hear Kishore Mehbubani, to hear also views from DC and from our guests in India who are studying China, Taiwan, and what's going on in Beijing at this moment. I want to thank you for joining us for this China Roundtable. When I come back, dog horror in a posh Noida society. A 7-month-old baby lost his life after being mauled by a stray dog. Citizens aghast and out in the streets in protest. Details on the other side.
Armed with facts, she takes the news bites home.
Do you think the future of these students are not hampered?
Fierce, bold and direct, setting the tone for the biggest stories from every corner and every angle. Expect nothing but the unfiltered truth.
News first, niceties later. Watch me, Nabila Jamal, on India Today.
Make your media plan smarter with India Today Live TV on your connected devices.
What languages are spoken at home? Tamil, Hindi, bit of Punjabi or not? Punjabi na. No Punjabi. And the language between you and Dharamji, language of love.
Language of love. Even today, touch wood. Even today, seeing them, it's like pure true love.
You did not teach him Tamil?
Little bit, yes.
He knows a few Tamil words.
Some thoda malum hai.
All the men in our family end up knowing more Tamil than their own language. Even Bharat with Sindhi is not as good as he understands Tamil.
Presented by Only OLX Autos gives the best price for your car. Co-presented by Macho Hint, Fashion Bade Aaram Se. Powered by Ashirwad Shubh Chakki Atta, Raho Char Kadam Aage.
Tonight at 9 p.m. on the news today with me, Rajdeep Sardesai. It was the centre that cleared the remission of the convicts in the Bilkis Bano gang rape and murder case, even as the CBI raised a red flag. What really then happens next in the Bilkis Bano case? Who will be held accountable for the seeming lack of complete justice? That's going to be a big talking point with lawyers and politicians. Also, why does Sashikala find herself in the eye of the storm over the Jayalalitha death case report? And Roger Binney is the new BCCI president. All that and much more on the news today.
You're on board the Newstrack. A 7-month-old infant was mauled to death by a stray dog in an apartment complex in Noida near Delhi. The horrific incident triggered outrage and protest. While dog lovers are saying that strays can't be abandoned, many are saying that animals can't be prioritized over human life. So are stray dogs a menace, or is there a lack of regulation when it comes to dealing with this issue?
Dog attack horror in a posh Noida society adjoining Delhi. 7-month-old baby mauled by a stray dog. The dog attack was so ferocious that the intestines of the infant came out. The child was rushed to the hospital and admitted to the ICU but failed to make it due to grave injuries. After a series of near-fatal attacks by dogs, the deadly dog mauling of an infant at Noida's Lotus Boulevard Society sent shockwaves across the country.
For now, assurances have been given to the residents that the stray dogs have been taken out and will be neutered but not brought back. But there still seems no end to the nightmares of the residents of Lotus Boulevard, as time and again they are asking for assurances from the police as well as the Noida authority that no more dogs or stray dogs will be allowed inside.
This horrific incident happened when parents of the infant were engaged in construction work. Angry residents staged protests against stray dog menace, seeking safety for their children, targeting dog lovers who bring and feed strays in the basement of the high-rise.
It's highly insensitive that a person is talking like this and they are bringing the dogs inside.
कोई कुत्ता काट रहा है ना तो हमें उसकी हेल्प नहीं करनी, हमें पहले उसकी वीडियो बनानी है क्योंकि उन्हें प्रूफ चाहिए, तो बचाना नहीं है उस बच्चे को, वीडियो बनानी है।
After massive outrage, the Noida civic body sent officials to round up the stray dogs. Many animal welfare activists call for sterilization of the dogs to curb this growing menace.
This is definitely a tragic, sad incident. What needs to be done, what's the need of the hour is sterilization. By effective sterilization, this is the only scientific method which makes sure that the population is stable. We request that the community, the society people work with the municipality in a way that all the dogs in the area are sterilized.
In September, an 11-year-old boy's face was gouged by a pet pit bull who attacked him in Ghaziabad, leaving him with as many as 150 stitches. With Milind Sharma in Noida, Bureau Report, India Today.
There's a big language showdown brewing in Tamil Nadu. After staging a massive protest against what it calls the imposition of Hindi by the centre, the MK Stalin-led DMK government has now passed a resolution against the same. The language debate erupted after the parliamentary panel's report suggesting Hindi as a medium of instruction in IITs and AIIMS in Hindi-speaking states.
Amidst protests, walkouts and endless drama, a resolution was passed in the Tamil Nadu Assembly against the imposition of Hindi. Triggered by the Amit Shah-led panel's report, which has propagated Hindi as a medium of instruction, the DMK, led by Chief Minister Stalin, tabled a resolution against imposition of Hindi on non-Hindi speaking states as the party's MLAs staged a walkout from the Assembly, reiterating there was no need for such a resolution because there was no question of actually imposing Hindi.
Prime Minister, அதாவது ஹிந்தி பேசாத மாநிலங்களில், அதாவது இந்த சி பிரிவு மாநிலங்களில் நிச்சயமாக ஹிந்தி இல்லாமல் தாய்மொழி கல்வியில் இருக்க வேண்டும் என்று புதிய கல்விக் கொள்கையிலும் சொல்லியிருக்காங்க. இதுலேயும் அதே மாதிரி அவங்க ஒரு பரிந்துரை கொடுத்துருக்காங்க. அந்த பரிந்துரைப்படி என்னென்னா, அந்த எந்தெந்த மாநிலங்கள் ஹிந்தி பேசாத மாநிலங்கள் அந்தந்த மாநில மொழியிலே எல்லாம் படிக்கணும் அப்படிங்கிறது தான் அதனுடைய சாராம்சம். அது ஹிந்தி வரணுங்கிறது அதில் ஒன்றும் கட்டாயம் இல்லை. அதனால் இதை நாங்கள் எதிர்த்து வெளிநடப்பு செஞ்சோம்.
Chief Minister Stalin, while tabling the resolution, called out the BJP and the central government, saying any imposition attempt would be rejected by the state of Tamil Nadu. He also reiterated his demand to name Tamil as an official language.
ஏன் அரசமைப்பு சட்டத்தின் 8வது அட்டவணையில் உள்ள 22 மொழிகளையும் அழியாது காத்திட இந்தி பேசாத மாநில மக்களின் உரிமைகளை கேந்திரிய வித்யாலயா பள்ளி முதல் ஐஐடி வரை இந்தி மட்டும்தான் என்றால் மற்ற மொழி மக்களுக்கும் இந்த கல்வி நிறுவனங்களுக்கும் எந்த தொடர்பும் இல்லை என்று தடுக்க நினைக்கிறார்கள். ஆங்கிலத்தை முற்றிலுமாக தடுப்பதன் மூலமாக ஆங்கில அறிவையே முற்றிலுமாக தடுக்கிறார்கள்.
The resolution has been passed. All the leaders, even the opposition leaders, have supported the resolution. So this is the mindset of the Tamil Nadu people.
So you're also believing that Hindi is being imposed here because BJP.
Of course, we did an agitation like 3 days back. Of course, we do believe that Hindi is being imposed here.
Right.
Interestingly, the AIA-DMK has also lashed out at the DMK. The party, torn between its Dravidian principles and its ties to the BJP, chose to label the Hindi imposition resolution as a distraction tactic.
இன்னொன்று, இந்திய எதிர்ப்பு திணிப்பு இவங்களுக்கு வேற வழியே இல்ல. இன்னைக்கு மக்கள் கொதித்து போயிருக்காங்க. இந்த ஆட்சி எப்ப போகும்னு பார்த்துட்டு இருக்காங்க. அதுக்கு சப்பக்கட்டு கட்ட தான் இந்திய எதிர்ப்பு எடுத்துக்கிறாங்க.
Amid the MBBS courses in Hindi move and the Parliamentary Committee's report on Hindi as a medium of instruction, the language debate has become a raging political debate in Tamil Nadu yet again. With Pramod Madhav in Chennai, Bureau Report, India Today.
This is where I wrap up the Newstrack tonight. For your time and your trust, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you at 8 p.m. tomorrow evening. Till then, from all of us here, goodbye, good night.
PCOS, PCOD and endometriosis. These are some very common health problems